Good morning. Good Tuesday morning. It is. It is Tuesday morning. I hope you're having a good week. I hope you had a good Monday. Uh, my doctor's office, Chris's doctor's office, had a good Monday because I didn't call him 100 times like I did last week. So anyway, so that's a good thing, right? That's a good thing. So I hope you had a good Monday. I hope you're having a good Tuesday so far. I know we're just getting underway, right? I don't know. I've been up a little while, quite a little while actually. So got to take Chris to the eye doctor today. I'm so excited. I hope his eyes are improved. Wouldn't that be awesome? I just think they should, but I don't know why. But anyway, uh, I've got a really good eye doctor that does the old school stuff. All right, before I get too far in, I know why I don't see my First John study guide because I took it to my bedroom so I could study it. So grab a First John study guide first Thursday in May, which I believe is the 5th, Cinco de Mayo. We'll start the study of First John. We'll just have to take it a section at a time. I've got it divided into sections. We won't be able to take just a whole chapter, but we'll just take a section in the book. So I don't know how long that might take. We'll see. But I got other stuff too. Got 21 days if you want to just develop the habit of Bible study. That's a real good basic study kind of devotional book for in the mornings, afternoon, whenever it's best for you. And 31 Days in Psalm 31 is a devotional that I've written about just being in the cave with God. And it's just all taken out of Psalm 31. I found myself in Psalm 31 so much. I was like, my goodness, I think I could get a few devotionals just out of this psalm. There were so many things. And so I did. 31 Days in Psalm 31 right there. So, but in the First John study guide's in there. So, and then there's others. There's stuff on my Dove's Fire Ministry site. There's some free stuff, poems for caregivers and things like that. So those seem to be moving this month. So that's kind of cool. Maybe from my other blog or something. But anyway, so this morning I was up early. I was drinking my coffee and I was just praying. I was just thinking. I was thinking of what am I going to meditate on today because I like to grab a scripture to meditate on, and I was just thinking about some things that yesterday I got. It wasn't anything terrible, but just a couple of just all these things are just coming at me. Kind of. You ever have those days? Not necessarily anything bad, but it's not necessarily anything good. you know, just some stuff you got to work through, new stuff to work through, right? And sorting things out and keeping those emotions intact, and just sorting through life's occurrences and just life in general, right? And sometimes that can just be, it can just be a chore sometimes, right? And so I was just thinking about it, and then I thought about. So as I was thinking and praying and thinking, what can I meditate on that'll just give me something to chew on today, mentally and spiritually? And uh, the first chapter of Job came to mind, and I thought, he didn't even have time to process anything in this moment, in this horrible day in his life. It says, the first guy came and said the oxen were plowing, and the Sabians raided them and took them all away, killed all the servants, and I'm the only one who escaped. While he was still speaking, another one came and said, fire fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I'm the only one that that escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another also came and said, the Chaldeans formed three bands and raided the camels and took them away and killed all the servants except me. I am the only one who escaped. And while he was still speaking, they came and told him that his children had died. They'd all been gathered in one house for a meal of some sort of celebration, just having a good time together, and a wind came and just killed all of his kids. While one was speaking, the next one came. He didn't even get a day to say, well, what should I do about my oxen? All right, now what shall I do about my camels? What am I going to do about my crops? What am I going to do about my kid? He didn't even have days or hours or even minutes in between. But Job knew he had one job, and that's why I named this Job's job. What was Job's job? Right? We know he was wealthy. We know he had a for his day. If you have a lot of camels today, that doesn't mean you're wealthy at all. But he had camels and servants and all this. And it says, when then Job arose, he tore his robe, he shaved his head, and fell to the ground and worshipped. I have to say that I'm like 99.9999% rounded up to 100% sure that might not be my response. You know, we run to God. And that is an act of worship when we get bad news. So what do we do when we get bad news? And thankfully, I don't know anybody that got this much bad news. Now I know over the last couple of years we've all had these moments. I lost three loved ones over it's been a little over a year now. But just I lost my mom and my dad and my aunt just really close together. And and during the pandemic there was so much death going on there, and there's just been a lot of bad news, right? But it says Job tore his robe and shaved his head and fell to the ground and worshiped. Now, I want to point out, yes, Job worshiped. Yes, that's perfect. That's the response. That's our job. Our job is to worship God no matter what. But it's not always that easy either. But what really stood out to me this morning as I read through this account again, he tore his robe and shaved his head. He allowed himself to show for the Jewish community, that was a sign of mourning. I'm entering a time of mourning. He shaved his head. He probably shaved his beard and all off, and that's a sign for them. That was a sign of deep mourning. He shaved his head and tore his robe and fell to the ground, and that was, he says, I'm in my soul is in mourning. But then he worshiped, and here's what he said. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked I will return there. And he ain't going back to his mother's womb, so that's kind of interesting, right? But in death, he'll be, I came here with nothing. I'm going, when I die, I'll have nothing. The Lord gave, the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And I have to say, when I get bad news, that's not always my first response. I usually work around to that, but that's not my first response. And this, the thing in this is it says that he hasn't even got sick yet. Everything bad hadn't happened, but he didn't know the next part of the story. He didn't know it was going to get worse when he thought it couldn't. Job's job was just to worship God. His heart was to worship God no matter what. And so when he was squeezed, when life began, just when he got put in that crucible of life, what came out? Blessed be the name of the Lord. He knew that God did not change, even though everything in his physical life had just changed. It says, in all this, Job didn't sin or charge God with wrong. And then over in chapter 2, it says Job said this to his wife, because his wife was going, why don't you just, why are you holding your integrity with God? Why don't you just curse God and die? God obviously did this to you. Job said to her, he said, you're foolish, first off. And then he said, shall we accept good from God? And shall we not accept adversity? And sometimes in our little faither communities, it we want to think that when bad things happen is because we didn't have faith or we didn't have enough trust in God. But what it boils down to is no matter what happens, we're going to trust God. That's our job. Our job is to worship God. Our job is to praise him, whether things are going hunky dory or whether they have fallen apart. And Job allowed himself to mourn. He did not say, well, there's nothing really wrong. I'm fine. He didn't try to mask his pain. He didn't try to act like he wasn't in pain. He said, I am in mourning, and here's my sign. Here's the sign to the world that I have just entered into a mourn. And they mourned for a long time when people died back then. I don't think we understand the value of mourning. I don't think we understand the mental health part of mourning. We don't allow ourselves to mourn, even over things sometimes, a loss of a job or even a major life change. When the pandemic first started and there was all these shutdowns and things, we didn't allow ourselves to mourn over the loss of our normal. And there was a grief there, right? And now we're going back to something that looks kind of like normal. We've adjusted, and that's okay. But that mourning is a healthy response to adversity. Mourning is a healthy response to a life change or a negative life change or something bad happening. And so Job says, I am in mourning. I'm letting the world know I'm going into mourning. However, I'm also saying I'm still going to praise God. Even in my mourning, God is still God. Even in my pain, God is still God. Even in the deepest, darkest cave of my life, God is still God. And whether there's adversity or whether there's blessing, so to speak, whether times are good or bad, I'm still going to bless God. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Now, he's gonna go through even a deeper, darker valley, right? He's going to become ill. And if it was today, if it was modern day, and he sought medical help, they'd say, well, it's stress. This is stress causing it. And it wasn't stress. I just want to point that out because they want to blame everything on stress or coffee. It's always stress or coffee. And it's not coffee. I can promise you that. Okay? It's never coffee. I'm just kidding. Anyway, but they would have blamed it on stress. You've got too much stress. And he did have a lot of stress, but it did not cause his illness. I just want to point that out. Oh, in James, as we studied James the last few weeks in the group, you can catch those videos on YouTube or in my videos somewhere here. We went through the whole book of James together, and we pulled out this verse. I think last week, actually last Thursday, we talked about it. Indeed, we count them blessed who endure. When we don't look at someone. I guess we have a respect for someone who goes through stuff. Right? Don't we have a respect when somebody just is able to suck it up and go through it? That doesn't mean they don't mourn. It doesn't mean they didn't experience loss. It doesn't mean they didn't experience pain. But somebody I used to work with in ministry used to say they had blood on their testimony. When they've gone through something, now you could share. Now, we can take it. Paul said, I've been shipwrecked, I've been beaten, I've been bit by a snake, I've been this, I've been stoned one time, left for dead. All these things happen, and yet God's grace is sufficient. When it comes out of his mouth, we go, yeah, yeah. Now, if it was not to make light of the royalty or whatever, but if it was a prince that had never had anything really, really bad happen in their life, they'd always had a silver spoon type thing, and they didn't have a whole lot of bad stuff, and they say, well, God's grace is sufficient. Well, you know what? God's grace is still sufficient. But somehow coming from somebody like Paul that's been through, we go, yeah, yeah, God's grace is going to have to carry me. I need God's grace, right? And so we count them blessed who endure. When they go, we talk about Joseph going through. We talk about Jacob going through. We talk about Daniel going through. That's the part. God's going to carry us through whatever. We're going to endure. Then he says, you've heard of the perseverance of Job and seen the end intended by the Lord, that the Lord is very compassionate and merciful. And here's our shift again. We saw what Job went through, but we look at God. We saw what Joseph went through, but we look at God. We saw what Daniel went through, but we look at God. Job says, I see all this going on around me. I just lost everything but my wife. And that was maybe, we won't go there. I've lost everything physically. My children, my wealth is gone in a day. But I'm going to look at God. That was his job. What was Job's job? To look at God, to worship in the midst of whatever was going on, good or bad. And guess what? That's our job too. So we can take an example from Job's job. And his job was to worship, and in the midst of his mourning, he still worshiped. In the midst of his pain, he still worshiped. In the midst of great, intense struggle, he still worshiped. That was his job. That's our job too. No matter what you're going through today, no matter what news you may get today, and if you watch the news or read the news feed even on the phone, wherever, you're going to get a lot of information, and you're going to get a lot of misinformation. What's our job? It's not to be troubled. It's not. We can mourn. We can be sad when we see things happening in the world. Totally natural, normal response. But in the midst of no matter what's, right, all the no matter what's, our job is still to just look at God. Why? That's where our peace is. Job had peace in the midst of a horrible, horrible time because he trusted God. There's another verse in Job that says, even if God slays me, I'm still going to trust him. That's my job. Job's job. So our job is to, no matter what is going on in our life, no matter how great today is or how trying today is, we want to focus on trusting God and letting his peace reign in our heart in the midst of whatever grace, whatever where you face, that grace is going to carry us through today, right? Be blessed. Let his grace carry you. Let his peace reign in your heart. Peace out. I'll see you tomorrow.